I'm going to share with you a few stories of how debugging went wrong between APIs and the browser, and what can we do to make it be a little bit better or faster to debug. So the first story is about a bug that took me 3 days to solve. I'm going to use this app to illustrate. This isn't the real app, of course, but this is an app with animal photos. You can only upload animal photos. So imagine that you would receive a pop-up whenever a new photo was uploaded. And the pop-up is coming. Yeah, see, this was the bug. Pop-up comes up. What? OK. Why is it closing? Have no idea. So it seemed like a really simple thing to fix. You just needed to find out where the pop-up closed. It wasn't that simple. So first thing was trying to find out what was opening the pop-up. And the pop-up was being opened properly. All the parameters were being set correctly. It was opening. OK, there's no problem at all. So what's closing it? There's no calls to the close function at all. There's nothing closing it. The only way to close this pop-up is to press a button or press outside the pop-up. There's nothing programmatic in the code that will close the pop-up. So I just ran through the entire code for 1-2 days trying to understand what was happening, because this was quite a complex application. This was probably something a bit stupid to do. Because after a certain time, I just thought, OK, I'm going to debug the routing library. Because what happened? Whenever the pop-up opened, it would create a new URL. So it was basically going to a new page, so you could come back to the pop-up whenever you wanted. And yeah, there was a race condition. And I tried to illustrate what was happening, but I don't think this is very easy to understand, because even I don't know exactly what was happening. So it starts here, somewhere in the code, completely unrelated to the pop-up. There was a promise somewhere. Something was waiting to happen, and then it would go to a page. And the variable that was set here was, for some reason, undefined. This was a bug in the actual application. It was a completely different bug. And then, in the meanwhile, the pop-up would open. And it would call the same function, go to that page. And it would go to the page, and the page name was set, so it would continue, blah, 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 and it would open the pop-up. But then, in the meanwhile, this promise resolves. It tries to go to a page called undefined. And it enters the routing library. And there is a function in there that's checking if the page exists. And you can see here that we're trying to go to a page that's undefined. So the page doesn't exist. It returns. The code was a little bit more complex than this. But what happened is, when it returned, there was some side effect that would return to the previous page. So what happens is, when this condition was called, we were on a page called list, for example. And in the meanwhile, the pop-up would open. Then it would open the page. And then this resolved. And then it would come back to the previous page, which was list, because when this function was instanced, the previous page was list. So the pop-up would close. I don't know if this is making any sense. This is quite confusing. Yeah, so the reason why I had so much trouble debugging was just because this wasn't throwing an error at all. It's just returning. There's no warnings. There's nothing. So how can you possibly know what is happening? So I guess that's a lesson to take from this. Just throw errors, whether it's a warning or anything. Even if you want your function to continue executing, or if you just want it to exit in a really soft way, you don't want the application to break, at least throw a warning, at least in development, so it makes it easier to find out what's happening. But we all do this. I mean, I do this every time, but shouldn't. Yeah, the second one was really bad unintended consequences. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Swagger. It's an API documentation tool. It shows you a list of available endpoints for an API and what methods you can query. And it also shows you a list of parameters, and you can make calls to the API from there. So I wanted to call this API, and it had this endpoint had this parameter called sort by, and I wasn't sure if I could sort by multiple parameters, right? Because nothing anywhere said that I could do this, but I wanted to try. Why not? Let's see. Can I put a comma and try sorting by 2 parameters? Just tinkering. Why not? I try. I submit the request. It gives me an internal server error. OK, fine. Maybe the API is just not working. But suddenly, after a while, I start looking around me, and all the API developers are running around, and what's happening? What's happening? The server is down. Yeah. So, yes. So this still happened a couple of times, because I tried again, because I didn't realize what was happening. So, yeah. Basically, an exception wasn't being handled. And this had microservices everywhere, and this particular service had lots of other microservices connecting to it, and they didn't work because they couldn't connect to this API because it was down. It's a nice story. So I guess the lesson to take from this one is catch your errors. Even if it's just in a generic way, just catch them somewhere, just have like a generic place that catches all of them so this kind of thing doesn't happen. I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about front end now, just to do to show you something similar in the front end. So, for example, this app here. So I've got this list here, and this baby elephant photo was carefully crafted so the ID doesn't exist. I'm going to try, if I click here, for example, I can see the photo in the list. But if I click here, it's going to a fake photo. So it doesn't exist, the app blows over. There's nothing here. So this app is using React, for example, but you can do it with any other system, with any other framework. React has this thing called error boundaries, and you can just surround your code. So this is the code for my application. You can just surround it with a component called error boundary, and then it catches all the errors. The error isn't very good, but still it's showing you something. So I guess this is something that we can also take and use in APIs as well. Just show a random error. In this case, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what kind of problem you're going to encounter, so you can just show something. OK, so the next one. So we built this form, right? And the form went to QA, and it was being submitted to an API as well. And when our QA started testing it, everything was all right. But after a while, they come to me, OK, look, the form submission doesn't work on mobile. OK, the form submission doesn't work on mobile. What does it say? It throws a validation error. But the validation error was coming from the server. OK, right? So why is this happening? So I just look at it on my phone. It works perfectly. I try on iPhone. I try on Android. Everything is working. Then I pick my colleague's phone. I type in my details. It works. I give him the phone. He types in his details. It doesn't work. I look at his details. This seems to be valid. It doesn't make sense. It has everything that it just should pass validation. It passes our front-end validation. It should pass the back-end validation. OK. Then I go and try remote debugging it in Safari. But Safari doesn't want to work. It's always like that. All I wanted to see was the response from the API. So I just went to the inspector. I looked here. The response was supposed to show here. It was showing if I debugged the outside of the phone, if I debugged on my browser, on my normal browser. But here it just wasn't working. So what do? Check the logs. We weren't showing the responses in the logs. We were just showing the requests. And this happens either in we had a GraphQL server, and we had an API, and neither of them was logging responses. So we could actually not see what the validation error was. I just wanted to see what the validation error was. Couldn't. So yeah, I guess I'll come back. So the only solution to these would be just to deploy both apps, logging the errors, and wait until the apps were deployed, and then we could test again, which is really troublesome. If we had logged the responses just before, it would have been way faster, because this took like two hours to solve or something, because back and forwards, I try my phone, I try his phone, and so what was it? Basically, when you're filling in a form and you blur out in a phone, it capitalizes the first letter in the field, and the backend API didn't accept capitalized emails. That was it. And the front end did. Horrible. So JavaScript brings a lot of logging options. You can have several types of logs, and you can filter them if you have if you're saving your log somewhere where you can browse through them. You can filter them out. So it's not a problem if you log too much, I guess, unless you're running out of money or something. And there are several logging services that you can use. These are some examples. There's others. I think people have mentioned others as well. And you can do the same. The thing that I mentioned before. You can catch just random errors that you get that you're not ready to, that you didn't handle, and you can log them here. So we're going to do a bit of live coding. I'm going to try. How much time?
You've got enough time to do something like that.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so we're back to the app. So this app has a particularity. You can only upload photos of animals. This connects to an API by Microsoft, and it processes your photo and checks if your photo has actually an animal on it. Let's look at some error scenarios that can happen if you didn't handle your errors. So let's try one. So this one will work. So let's see what happens if it works. I hope it works. I actually didn't test it out. Yeah, it works. Here's your photo. It's a cat with a pillow. Next photo. This is a photo of the London Underground. There's no animals in here at all, so it should fail. It's expected. Okay, and you see here, no animals in here. It's fine because we know that there's no animals in this photo, so we actually don't really need more information, even from a user's perspective. But what if we try this one? So I don't know if it's big enough. You can see there's some monkeys in here, bathing in a spa. So let's try uploading. And now we're going to get the same error. And now it's not really helpful, because you know that there's animals in there, and you want to know why there are no animals in there. Why does it not find animals in this photo? So let's go back to our code. I'm using a GraphQL server here, but you can use any type of, it can be with any server, REST API, whatever. So you can see this is the check. It's just checking if the categories and the tags that came back from the computer vision API, if they have the word animal on them. In this case, they don't. So we can make this error a little bit better. We can show the categories and the tags that were returned from the server. So let's just do it. And it should have saved now. Oh, and now let's do it again, sorry. OK, this internet is faster than at my house. So yeah, you can see now the API didn't find any animals in this photo. You have the list of tags and you have the list of categories. There's no animal in here at all. There is bear. Then there's man and people. OK, it just thinks there's people bathing or something. Yeah, but you've seen that error. It's still not it's not ready for the UI because you don't want your users to see these, and you want to display your error output in a friendlier way. Maybe you want to display the tags in a different place, and you want to display a different error message. So yeah. So let's do this. We can create a custom error that allows you to have data on it. And then we can make it come back to the front end. And then it's and then we can actually have a nicely formatted error message for this particular situation. You can just join the tags, but if you wanted to join the tags with a plus or whatever, you could. Okay, this is not, okay. I'm not going to show this in the app because this is showing the right bit, the wrong bit, but we'll come back here, doesn't matter. Okay, so now the next one, there's just another one. Okay, so we saw that type of error, but we only threw one error, and it's always the same error regardless of whatever happens. But so other things can happen. It's not only not finding animals. The API, the call to the Microsoft API can fail, and we didn't handle that. So what happens if we forgot to handle that? So I'm going to, this one is clearly an animal. You can see that it would find an animal in here. So yeah, just says, this is for me is the worst type of error. Cannot read property fantasy land map of undefined. Where does this come from? Yeah, so some of you, if you have used Ramda, you know that this comes from Ramda, which is a functional programming utility. But it just doesn't tell you, I mean, it's not helpful at all. So where does this come from? If we look at the logs, there's something here speaking about Ramda. I'm not going to go in depth with it. And then it says that it comes from this resolvers file, which was the one that we were looking at before, which is the file that calls the API. So it basically comes from this function. So at this point, we have two different types of errors that are more or less related to the same thing. So we can just throw an error code. I'm throwing an error code for animal not found, and when we call the computer vision API, I can throw another error code for that says there was an analysis error. Just says that it couldn't actually call the API for some reason. And it sends back the message from the API. So when we see it in the UI, we will know exactly what happened. And now we can have, I think my checkout failed again. Okay, so now we can have a different component for each type of error. So this is the one that you have already seen, but we can also show something else for the other error, and we can show a default message if it's any other type of error. So let's do it. Oh, wait. Let's upload the thing again. Yeah, we couldn't analyze your photo. I don't know if this is big enough. We couldn't analyze your photo, and the image is too large. We wouldn't be able to know this before. And that API also throws its own errors, so you can use them and throw your own. Yeah. So I think this is it. So I think the moral of the story here is just fail just right at the beginning. But at least, yeah, fail nicely. Throw a nice error message so your user, whether it's the user of your library, whether it's the user of your API, or the user of your app, just let them know. Because I guess, like, yeah, the worst thing about this is that when you have errors that are not understandable, everyone will get stressed around you. It's not just you. It's your colleagues. It's like, it's not just the developers, it's product owners, QAs, and sometimes it scales up and people are just go crazy. And sometimes it's just a simple error. Just someone didn't type the right message. But yeah, this is really difficult. Yeah. No questions because that's for afterwards. Yeah. So, yeah, if someone, thank you. My thank you to everyone, and thank you to my colleagues who also lived through these errors with me. There's a few of them in here. Yeah.